Hi everyone, this is part 2 of our Adobe Illustrator jacket drawing tutorial. We'll pick up right where we left off on part 1. Okay, so I'm going to draw the movement lines first, and then I'm going to draw the shadows after that. So let's talk about movement lines. Okay. So I'm going to make the movement lines thinner, but so that you can see more clearly what I'm doing, let me draw these lines in a purple color. I'm going to keep a 1-point stroke and then I'm going to make them thinner later on. So I'm going to start from down here and I'm going to draw this line going up in the same direction that I see it going. But what I want to do is go into my stroke panel and go here to profile. And right now the profile is uniform, which means that the line that you're drawing is just a straight regular line. But here you can make different shapes of your line. So for these types of movement lines, I prefer to use with profile number 4, which gives you a line that's thick on one end and gives you a point at the other end. So let's click on that. And as you can see, the line now changed from being uniform to being thick on the bottom and thinner at the top. And I think that just gives it a nice flow to the movement line. So I'm gonna make all my movement lines like that. But first I'm going to draw them out and then all together I'll change that profile. And one other thing, and as you can see the lines that are here in this area, they should be visible here at the waist, but then they should disappear behind the flap. So in order to make sure that my layers are in the right order or that these lines that I'm making are in the right order from the beginning, I'm going to unlock everything and I'm going to click on this main body layer that I have because I want those lines to be on the layer that's right above this so that it's on a layer that's underneath the flap. So let's double click on that to isolate it. And now when I draw on top of this, these lines are going to be on a layer that is directly above this main body, but it'll be underneath the flap. So let's start from the bottom and we can go into the area that's the flap. Because since we're doing this in the right layer order, right off the bat, those lines are going to disappear behind the flap after I de-isolate this. And we're also going to be drawing this belt that goes on the waist. We're going to do that probably as one of the last steps. So these lines are going to disappear behind that tie as well. So see, when I take the main body out of isolation mode, this layer right here is my main body. And these lines that you see right above them are the fold lines. And then my flap is on this layer here. So it's all in the right order. Okay, so let's isolate that again because we want to now draw these bottom fold lines. And I'm just going to follow what I'm seeing here. We can always adjust those. Right here is one of the more prominent movement lines or fold lines. And now I'm going to quickly draw the movement lines that I'm seeing on the sleeve. So again, I'll just isolate that. So that those lines can be right on top of that main body layer that is all together with the sleeve. And here I think I'm going to make this movement line a little more exaggerated. I'm going to make it reach up a little bit more. And let's add another line right here. Make sure that this comes down so that that belt on the sleeve is overlapping over it. And I'm going to deselect that. And now I'm just going to take these lines and group them because I just think that certain things that go together, that you might want to change the characteristics all at the same time, they should be grouped so that you can change things at the same time. Like if you want to change the stroke or the color, you can change those all at once. So for these lines, I'm gonna give it the same type of characteristics that I gave this line up here. So I'm gonna make them all like a 0.35, and I'm gonna change them all to this width profile 4. And you see how they now all changed. And with the width profile, one thing that you want to make sure of is that that profile is going in the right direction. So let me just zoom in here. Like you see this line. What I want is for this line to be thicker at the top and thinner at the bottom. And it worked out just fine. But if I had wanted the thickness to be at the bottom and the thinness to be at the top, then I could just click this option here that says flip along, and it would change the direction of the thinness and the thickness. So let's go back. Seems like all of them are going in the direction that I wanted. So we're gonna lock everything again, but I'm gonna unlock only that main body layer and double click to isolate so that we can get the shadows in the right place. But before we do that, real quick, if you're finding this content useful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It'll help me to keep bringing you more videos like this. And now the shadows are gonna go directly on top of this main body layer, but they're gonna go underneath those movement lines because we want those movement lines to overlap on top of the shadows. And these might seem like small details now, but it really makes a difference in your sketch. So let's take a contrast color. Let's take like an orange. And let's draw our shadows. So right here, I see this shadow shape right here, and I'm gonna follow that shape that I'm seeing. So it's kind of following along the edge of the movement line, but then it gets wider over here. And I hope that you guys can see it on your screens. But if you can't, then just download that picture and I'm sure that you'll be able to see it. And now what you do is just flip the stroke and the fill so that you get a shape that's only a fill. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick either black, or you can pick like a shade of gray. I would use a darker shade of gray. Let's go for this really dark shade of gray here, this charcoal color. And we're gonna make all our shadows this dark color. But in order to create that shadow effect, we're gonna go to our appearance panel, click on the drop down arrow for fill, click on opacity, and we're gonna change two things. We're gonna lower the opacity level, and we're also gonna change the blending mode. So let's change that opacity to about a 15%, which as you can see, lightens it up a lot. And then we're gonna change the blending mode to multiply. And we do multiply because when you fill your garment in with color, that multiply effect just looks a lot better on top of the color. And depending on what color you make your garment, you might find that you might need to use a different blending mode. You can play around with all of these, but multiply usually works on most colorways. So I just make it multiply right off the bat. So we're gonna deselect that. And I just want you to see what that looks like for a second. So I'm gonna fill my garment in with white. And as you can see, that's what that shadow looks like. So that's looking pretty good. And our sketch is really coming along. So let's quickly make our other shadows. Putting that main body into isolation mode again so that our new shadows that we're creating are gonna be right on top of that sublayer. And then everything will be in the right order. Again, I think I'll just keep working with that orange. And you can make your shadows with the pencil tool or the paintbrush tool, but I'm really comfortable with the pen tool, and so I just draw my shadows with the pen tool. And what I'm doing is I'm just basically making whatever shape I think that these shadows are. So I think this shadow looks like this. Kind of comes like a triangle, like it's wider on the bottom. And I can take my eyedropper tool and click on this other shadow that I made up here where the armhole would be. And I can click with my eyedropper tool on that shadow that I already made, and it'll make my new shadow the same exact characteristics. So you see, if I go to my appearance panel, it's giving me the same 15% opacity and the same blending mode of multiply, because the eyedropper tool will copy the same color and the same characteristics as whatever you click on. So I'm gonna draw all these shadows, and then I'm gonna apply this characteristic to all of them all at once. And you don't have to draw it as an outline, like I just did this previous shadow by doing this, and then I flipped the fill and the stroke. You can draw it as a fill right off the bat. It's just really up to you, however you prefer to do it. And maybe that's a little bit too wide there. And here, I think the shadow is a little bit more irregular. It's kind of more like an oval, and I don't have to worry about what I'm doing up here because that belt on the waist is gonna cover it. And here, we're gonna style these shadows a little bit more than at the top because you can see these shadows more. And this one, we have a really dark shadow. We want to make sure to follow that movement line. And that's the type of shape I'm going to make that. And then here we have a little bit more irregular shadow also. So it looks pretty harsh right now, but you saw that when I changed the blending mode and the opacity, it makes it look a lot more subtle. So it's gonna look a lot nicer when we apply our shadow characteristics. Here we're gonna have a little bit of a longer shadow. And here we're just gonna follow this little curve here. And now I've selected all of these shadows, and I'm gonna take my eyedropper tool, touch that first shadow that I made. And when I fill in my jacket, this is what the shadows are looking like. And I think they're gonna look pretty good after I make everything the right color. I think it's gonna work out well. Let me change these green lines to fuchsia so that it doesn't look so irregular. Okay, so those are the shadows that go with the movement lines and the folds. But I have a few other spots where I want to add shadows. I definitely want to add a shadow under the flap and under the collar and the lapel, and also a little bit of shadow at the center front. Okay, so the first shadow of these other shadows that we need to draw is going to be the one that's under the flap. And the way that I'm going to go about doing this is I'm going to put this into isolation mode so that again we can have our layers in the right order. And I'm going to copy this shape by clicking on it and clicking on Alt Shift and dragging the new shape down. So let me get rid of that fill. Let me isolate the new shape so that I can be clear on where that new shape is. And I'm using my scissor tool to cut the path here at this corner and at this corner. And I'm gonna hit the delete key to delete everything that's highlighted because all I really wanted to copy was that bottom edge shape so that I get a shape that's perfectly parallel to the bottom flap shape. So let me bring this line up a little bit. This is gonna be my shadow. And what I'm gonna do is make a thicker line. Let's do like a 3 or a 4 because the flap is gonna go above this. So I'm gonna go ahead and expand that so that it's a fill and not a stroke. And I'm only gonna do that when I know that the thickness that I chose is the thickness that I want. And now I'm gonna change the color to that same dark charcoal color that we used for our other shadows. Go into the appearance panel, into the opacity, lower the opacity in the same way, 15%, and multiply. And we're gonna take that out of isolation mode. So you see I have a shadow that's perfectly parallel to the flap. And it's not totally in the right order, but it's close. It didn't land under the flap, but it landed above the flap, and that's fine because now we just have to take that sublayer and move it down just one spot. And now it's underneath the flap. So the flap overlaps it, and you see the shadow comes out from underneath, which is what we wanted. Now let's do the same thing to the sleeve belt. So we're gonna take that main shape that wraps around the whole wrist. And for this, we can actually use object path, offset path. And we don't want that to go inside like with the stitch lines, we want it to go outside. So let's take out that negative, and now it's going outside, but that's offset a little too much. So let's play with the numbers. And I want it just a little bit outside of that first path that I had. Let's make that a different color so we can see. And I'm gonna change the thickness to a 3. And I'm gonna just use my scissor to cut away what I don't need. So I don't need any shadow on the sides, only on the top and on the bottom of the belt. So I'm deleting these sides, and I'm gonna use those same characteristics, the same color. I'm actually gonna change this to a fill instead of a stroke. Go to the appearance panel, 15% opacity, and multiply. And in my layers, I can see that the shadows are underneath the sleeve belt where they need to be. If they're coming out a little bit too much from the garment, you can just fix that. And now we're gonna do our collar shadow and our lapel shadow. So you can try to offset these like I did with the belt to make your shadow, but for me, I think it's just easier to draw the same shape all around. So that's what I'm gonna do. So let me lock this, and using a contrast color, I'm just gonna draw a line pretty much parallel to the outside of my collar and my collar stand and my lapel all at once. So that green line is that parallel line. And you see that was really fast to do. So it just depends on what method you prefer and depends on the situation. So here we made our line thick like we did with the other shadows. And we can go ahead and I really actually want to place it under the collar and the lapel just to make sure that it's the right thickness for this part. So I think I want to make this a little bit thicker because I want this shadow to be a little bit more prominent. So I'm gonna go ahead and make that green line expanded so that it's a fill and not a stroke. And I actually want to change the shape of it a little bit here because as you can see, it's kind of at an angle here and I want it to meet this part right here. So I'm just going to adjust my line. I can just pull on the anchor points and the handles to just drag it where I want it to be. And before I add the characteristics to this shadow here, I'm going to show you another way to add those characteristics. So I'm going to select this shadow that already has the characteristics that I want, which are the dark charcoal color, the 15% opacity, and the multiply blend mode. And I'm going to go to Window, Graphic Styles, and I'm going to click on the drop down menu and click on New Graphic Style and change that to say Shadows. And this is going to give me all these characteristics in this box right here. So when I select my new shadow that I just made, which is currently in this solid 100% opacity green color, I can just click on this new graphic style that I made and give it those same exact characteristics as I've used on my other shadows. So let's lock everything again and only click on that main body layer. And now we're going to draw the shadow for the center front. So choosing a contrast color, I'm going to choose that orange. I'm going to make a shadow that just goes all the way around the center front, starting right here at the inside neck. And it doesn't have to be like so precise. You can also copy that line over like we did before, or you can offset. It's up to you. And I'm really just gonna make it up to this point. So let's give it some thickness here, maybe like a 4 point. And let's move that shadow down under the path of the main body so that the main body overlaps it. We'll click out of isolation mode just to see where we're at and just see that it's landing where I want it to be. I'm gonna add a point here. Couldn't really see that area too well, so that's why I got a little bit irregular shape there. And then I'm going to expand that so that it's a fill. I'm gonna click on that graphic style that we just made. Turn off the eye of the reference layer, and as you can see, we have our shadow with all the same characteristics of the other shadows that we made. Okay, wow, so we've gotten a lot done, and in part 3, I'm going to show you how to reflect this, how to draw the belt, and how to put our final touches on this jacket. Click on the link to watch, you don't want to miss it.